Paulogia, and another edition of Ham and Egg News, where we react to Ken Ham reacting to things. If you're a regular viewer, you've likely noticed fewer Ham and Egg News episodes this year, in part because Ken Ham has stepped back from a number of his duties at Answers in Genesis and simply hasn't been on Answers News. Or so I thought. You see, I've been foolishly watching the main channel, where at least once a week we see the familiar, bright, shiny blue Answers News like this.
You guys can go ahead and clap.
Come on now, let's go. There we go. All right, that ain't no golf clap.
That's a good audience. We haven't even started yet, and they like this.
Good job, guys.
But now I've learned there's a stealth secret stash, where we get what seems to be some kind of lonely, alternate Answers News After Dark, with Ken Ham running solo.
Who watched the debate? Did you? My response to the debate was, come quickly, Lord Jesus, so we don't have to go through another debate.
He's finally found a way to rid himself of all the annoying people he had to suffer when Answers News began. As we get older, that's maybe what we all aspire to. Just let me yell at the sky unhindered.
Who's laughing now? Shut up!
This particular rant is called Here's Why and How Christians Should Vote in 2024. Presumably he means American Christians. As someone born in Australia, Ken should be aware that not all Christians are American, though by his narrow definition, maybe they are. Anyhow, I wonder what candidate he will endorse.
And as Christians, I believe the way we should vote is to minimize evil and to maximize righteousness.
Minimize evil and maximize righteousness. I'm still not sure. One of these people says they're a Christian. One of these people says they're not.
I'm a Christian.
One of these people had a career putting criminals behind bars, and one is a convicted felon awaiting sentencing. Nope. Sorry, Ken. I'm going to need some more clues.
You're not voting for a pastor of a church. We don't use the qualifications in the Bible for a pastor or elder for the President of the United States.
Oh, well, the Bible says that pastors and elders have to be men. So by saying we don't use that criteria, then Christians are allowed to vote for a woman for president if they want to. Very progressive, Ken.
Now, I want to show you this video and just stop it now and then.
You're stealing my thing, Ken. That's what I do.
If you're religious, you have, I think, a better feeling toward it. You know, you're supposed to go to heaven, ideally not hell, but you're supposed to go to heaven if you're good. I think our country's missing a lot of religion.
You know, one of the things I find, some of the things he's saying here is typical of what people in the church say. Many people don't realize or understand everyone has a religion. Atheists have a religion. Everyone has a worldview. Everyone has a faith position. And so there's no non-religious position. When they talk about the nuns having no, they having no religious position, no, everyone has a religious position.
I suppose declaring I'm not affiliated with any religion is a religious position in the same way bald is a hairstyle. Not collecting stamps is a hobby, or an empty cup is a beverage.
What they usually mean when they say religious, they usually mean believing in God, Christianity. That's what they mean.
I mean, that may seem true if you live such a life that you act as if all Christians are American, but I can assure you that the no religion in particular crowd equally reject Islam, Mormonism, Buddhism, Scientology, all of them. It's understandable that Americans would have to push back strongest against Christianity because it's being shoved in their face a lot more frequently.
And then he says, if you're good, you're supposed to go to heaven. I don't know whether he's just trying to play politics here or what it is. I don't know his heart. God knows his heart.
I think we can know his heart.
I think it really was a much better place with religion. It was almost a guide, to a certain extent it was a guide. You want to be good to people. Without religion, there are no guardrails.
I really hate this view of religion, and Christians should too. The view that it's basically a useful tool to control the behavior of the masses. This view doesn't care at all if religion is true, just if the religion has utility. This is what someone says who wants to control people. I don't care one little bit about how useful a particular religion may or may not be. Show me that it's true, and then I'll deal with social ramifications.
And in a way, what he's really saying, I would say, is with Christianity and the morality based on the Bible, There are guardrails. We know what's right, we know what's wrong.
Agree that right has to do with actions that reduce harm and promote both individual and group flourishing, then we can evaluate what's right. If we can agree that wrong has to do with actions that increase harm and are a detriment to individual and group human flourishing, then we can evaluate what's wrong. No God or Bible required. No.
I think he definitely recognizes that we need the morality of the Christian faith, the Christian worldview.
No. Trump didn't exalt Christianity. He praised the controlling guardrail utility of religion in the vaguest of senses.
But now we've had generations indoctrinated against the Bible, and so man's word is the foundation for their worldview. Therefore, ultimately, anything goes. But those who are secularists, they have guardrails. And their guardrails are, you can't allow the absolutes of Christianity. You've got to allow everything else but the absolutes of Christianity.
It's not anything goes. It's a standard of reducing harm and increasing flourishing, both for the individual and for the species as a whole. The times where a secularist is against Christianity, it's at the points where Christianity causes harm and hinders flourishing.
I'd love to see us get back to religion, more religion in this country.
Immigration would certainly infuse the United States with more religion, or maybe those aren't the religions you're looking for.
They say, well, now you're being intolerant of our worldview. And I say, but wait a minute, you're being intolerant of my worldview. And they say, but all we want is, we want to allow freedom for everyone's worldview, which you're not, because our worldview is totally in conflict with that.
Karl Popper's paradox of tolerance suggests that a society must be intolerant of intolerance to remain tolerant overall. Popper, a 20th century philosopher, argued that unlimited tolerance could lead to the destruction of tolerance itself. He believed that while most ideas should be permitted and debated openly, society must retain the right to suppress those who advocate intolerance, especially if they use violence or threats. This principle aims to protect open societies from being undermined by extremist ideologies that would seek to eliminate tolerance and freedom if given the chance.
Which I believe this coming election is going to be strategic in America. And because if certain people get in and do what they're doing now, but to a much greater extent, I can see that discrimination, persecution of Christians is going to exponentially rise.
I've been alive and in Christian circles for enough decades to know that Christians will perceive themselves as being increasingly persecuted no matter who is in office. But I do agree that this is going to be a very strategic election. So this Canadian encourages all eligible Americans to register to vote at vote.gov and be part of the strategy. If you don't vote, you don't get to complain. Hey Answers News Team, what's it like in a world without ground news?
So you can kind of see
The bias.
the little bit bias,
You can
maybe.
see the secular leftist ideology and the bias there, and it's all the way through.
Yeah, there's no
So
attempt at neutrality,
there's-
journalistic neutrality or
not
anything.
even a
There's really
little bit.
not.
To be fair, ground news doesn't get rid of bias, but in the time I've been using it regularly, I can now see the bias in my news consumption. I use ground news all the time, particularly when I strongly agree or strongly disagree with some coverage, because confirmation bias is very difficult to eliminate without outside help. You can check it out at ground.news/Paulogia. The link is in the description. Browse your favorite sources and topic, or you can search for a specific story, like one from our favorite creationist show.
One half of world-famous gay penguin couple dies in Sydney Aquarium.
You drop it into ground news, and instantly we see 159 total news sources covering the story. Definitely a political skew, with 37% left-leaning versus only 15% right-leaning. 80% of the sources are high factuality, so not too bad. And the ground news bias comparison shows the left emphasizing emotional reaction of the penguins, and the right is stressing the broader same-sex symbolism. We're going to look at this data for our stories today, but to do this for yourself, check them out at ground.news/Paulogia and use my link to save 40% on the same Vantage plan I use for unlimited access to all of their features.
Louisiana requires 10 commandments to be displayed in public school classrooms.
Before we get into Roger's pontification on the destruction of the wall between church and state, let's do a quick ground news check. This one had a whopping 336 sources, maybe the most I've seen so far from Answers News. 74% of the sources are high factuality. Good. In terms of bias distribution, we're 46% in the center, 33% to the left, and 21% to the right. I'm not sure why the right is quieter. Maybe anger about something drives more news stories than support. Let's see if I'm correct with the bias comparison tool. The left emphasizes opposition to the law's constitutionality, focusing on potential lawsuits and historical legal battles, indicating a critical stance. The center highlights social media reactions and comments from Republican State Representative Horton, showcasing mixed public opinions and defending the bill's moral code. The right covers bipartisan support and elaborates on previous court rulings, providing judicial concision and defending comments from Louisiana officials. Okay, Roger, are you going along with the supportive side?
Now, this one sounds like a good idea on the surface, but let's stop and think for a second. Okay? But the problem is, America in the public schools today, the structure of the public schools are not going to present those things in a favorable light.
This is a completely fair point, and they should know. I'm very familiar with how young Earth creationists, who are forced by law to teach evolution, works out. It is not taught correctly, and it's with such error and bias that it would be better for the students if they hadn't taught it at all. Creationists do this on purpose, so they can anticipate it coming back the other way.
So as a ministry, we've cautioned people about demanding that biblical creation be taught in the classrooms, in the biology classrooms and things, because when I was a teacher, I would have laughed it out and told the kids it was a joke and not taught it well.
Now I'm wondering if Roger taught evolution well. Sometimes he shows glimmers of insight, but other times, not so much.
So we want to be careful and consider some things as those ideas come up.
Right. Is it a good thing if we, let young people know that there is only one God? That if we let them, we want people to not murder. We want people to not commit adultery. That's great.
Yes, there's a real epidemic of kindergarten children who are cheating on their spouses.
There was one thing I liked in there that also talked about how they're authorized to either display or talk about like the Mayflower Compact, Declaration of Independence, the Northwest Ordinance, some other founding documents that at times people would say, no, you can't talk about those things because they mention God and we have to have this separation.
They're very explicit about God's role in providence.
Right.
To be clear, there is no evidence that the Mayflower Compact, Declaration of Independence, or Northwest Ordinance have ever been banned from display or discussion in U.S. public schools on the grounds of church-state separation. These documents are considered foundational historical texts in American history and are regularly taught and displayed in schools across the country. This was done purely for optics, not necessity.
So I think this really exposes a major misunderstanding among a lot of Christians today. A lot of Christians believe that they so-called, kicked out religion out of the classroom. No, what they've really done is they've kicked out Christianity and they've replaced it with the religion of secular humanism.
Removing overt religious practices from public schools protects religious freedom for all students. Schools serve diverse populations with various beliefs, including no religious affiliation. Religious neutrality prevents marginalization of students with minority views. The claim that secular humanism is a religion misinterprets secularism. In education, secularism ensures neutrality, not promotion of any worldview. It aims to create an inclusive environment for all students. Secular humanism isn't mandated or taught as a belief system in schools. While some educational principles, critical thinking, scientific inquiry, equality, may align with secular humanism, they're presented neutrally and are based on reason and human rights rather than promoting a specific philosophy.
And you think about just the irony of a lot of these statements. They say that these civil rights groups, they want to keep religion out of the classroom, keep religion out of the government. But again, if you look at these doctrines of evolution, millions of years, Big Bang, these are all based on humanistic beliefs about the unobserved past.
Science uses indirect evidence to infer past events like the Big Bang or evolution. Paleontologists study fossils to trace evolutionary changes, while cosmologists analyze current galactic properties and radiation to understand the early universe. This process resembles forensic scientists reconstructing crime scenes from evidence, despite not witnessing the event. Answers in Genesis's logic would seemingly preclude solving any murder without eyewitnesses. The scientific method involves hypothesis formation, experimentation or observation, and theory revision based on results. Unlike belief systems, scientific conclusions evolve with new data. This would also be a good time to point out that millions, if not billions, of Christians around the world accept an old age of the Earth, Big Bang cosmology, and biological evolution. This shatters AiG's notion that these scientific conclusions become accepted exclusively due to an anti-God worldview.
This is an image of that papyrus, and the article reads, details about Jesus' childhood revealed in 2,000-year-old manuscript.
Ground News found 16 sources tracking this story. Still pretty good for AiG's obscure selections. Only 42% of these sources are deemed high factuality, 50% mixed, which I can attest. The reporting on this is all over the place. Only 2 left-leaning sources, 64% right-leaning. The right wants to emphasize that the infancy Gospel of Thomas is considered apocryphal, meaning it's not part of most Bibles. I guess they don't want Da Vinci Code-style confusion out there. I've known about this infancy Gospel most of my life, but I was always very curious about apocryphal books. Too much, maybe. My first pastor had concerns about my fascination. I just wanted more Leviathans.
So you may have heard of things like the infancy Gospel of Thomas and the Gospel of Thomas, some of these apocryphal Gospels. This is a story about Jesus' childhood. So when we read in the Bible, we don't have much detail about the time between Jesus' birth, the flight to Egypt, and his time in Nazareth.
Of course, this is one of the tricky parts of the Gospels, where Matthew records that Mary and Joseph take Jesus to Egypt, and in Luke, they instead return to Galilee and Nazareth. I guess Roger's going with the both harmonization.
Both is good.
We don't have a lot of those from the early manuscripts. They're much later. This one, the Infancy Gospel of Thomas, the last known date of this was in the 11th century.
Thought to be originally written in Greek, as is this later manuscript Roger is talking about. Latin and Syriac translations from the 5th and 6th centuries had been found before this.
But we've known since the 2nd century, toward the end of the 2nd century, there were a couple of church fathers who talked about Thomas, this writing known, alleged to be from Thomas. Now, it was unclear whether it was the so-called Gospel of Thomas or the so-called Infancy Gospel of Thomas. The reason I say so-called, a couple of reasons. One, they're not written by Thomas. 2, they're not Gospels. Mm-hmm. Most of these things that come out where there's these ancient writings, they like to give the title Gospel to, because it sells better, but they're not gospel accounts at all.
The term gospel, euangelion in Greek, simply means good news. Early Christian communities used it loosely, and later canonical gospels were not called gospels until well after they were written. The label does not inherently mean a biographical account of Jesus.
This one, what it is the Infancy Gospel of Thomas is like 19 very, very short chapters. Some are just like 2 verses long. And what it is Jesus is like a little brat, basically. He kills at least 3 people.
Wait a minute.
Throw the heresy flag.
Heresy flag.
I got a red flag over here.
What kind of red flag?
The Oklahoma coach has thrown down a red flag indicating he's challenging the ruling on the field.
So Jesus, like in this, Jesus as a child, somebody runs into him as they're running along. Somebody bumps him in the shoulder. He turns around, curses the guy, and he drops dead. And he does that to a teacher that he kind of mouths off to, and kind of scolds the teacher, and people are dropping like flies around him. And so it does not match the character of Jesus at all.
The idea of gods, heroes, or legendary figures exhibiting mischief or morally questionable behavior in their youth, only to later show divine wisdom or power, is a common motif in many traditions. The Greek hero Heracles, as a child, killed his music teacher in a fit of rage. In Hindu mythology, the child god Krishna engaged in playful mischief like stealing butter. In Jewish midrashic tales, young Moses used God's power to grab Pharaoh's crown. The founders of Rome, Romulus and Remus, were depicted as troublesome children raised by a she-wolf. The list goes on and on. The Infancy Gospel of Thomas' depiction of the troublesome nature of young Jesus may symbolize his divine power uncontrolled by human norms in a manner consistent with other ancient traditions about gods or heroes who misbehave as children but later show wisdom. Such stories don't fit with the canonical Gospels, but they represent an attempt by certain communities to explore the mystery of Jesus' divinity in a familiar genre.
He's spouting a bunch of Gnostic nonsense. So it's a Gnostic writing from the 2nd century.
The term Gnostic is often misapplied. While some apocryphal texts do have Gnostic elements, it's not accurate to label the infancy Gospel of Thomas as a Gnostic text. Gnosticism, as a broad term, refers to a variety of early Christian movements that emphasized secret knowledge, gnosis, and often had distinct cosmological views about the material world and divinity. While the Gospel of Thomas might have Gnostic associations, the infancy Gospel does not share the same characteristics. It's more a legendary narrative than a theological treatise tied to Gnosticism.
It's not something that should be considered to be part of the biblical canon at all. It was not written by an apostle or a close associate of an apostle.
Because, of course, the authors the church ascribed to Luke and Mark never actually met Jesus. Tim here would say that Mark is based on the teachings of Peter, and Luke was a traveling companion of Paul, who also never met Jesus. So helpful.
But there was a whole bunch of writings in that time period, just as there are today, where people are doing something like a historical fiction. There's not as much threat to it today. So, for example, I did 3 novels on the life of Noah. Well, they're obviously historical fiction. They're written thousands of years after the guy's life. It was not from that time period.
Tim, you've been a bad Christian with your Noah fanfic. Revelation 22:18-19. I warn everyone who hears the words of the prophecy of this book. If anyone adds to them, God will add to him the plagues described in this book. And if anyone takes away from the words of the book of this prophecy, God will take away his share in the tree of life and in the holy city, which are described in this book. Proverbs 30:5-6. Every word of God proves true. He is a shield to those who take refuge in him. Do not add to his words, lest he rebuke you and you be found a liar.
So there was another writing called the Acts of Paul and Thecla, where it was Paul traveling around with this young virgin, and they're doing all these amazing things. She's doing the amazing things.
Apparently, knowing about her sexual history was important to appreciating her miracles.
You know, the way it's portrayed on TV all the time is like, oh, well, there are a bunch of books vying for inclusion in the canon, and then these are the ones that made it because of the power of the church. That's complete nonsense. They knew very early on that a whole bunch of these were not, they were not inspired, that they were not inerrant. It didn't line up with the theology being taught in Scripture anywhere. I mean, this book is full of problems.
Some would argue that the theology of each book was a more important consideration than genuine authorship or historical reliability.
As far as the age goes, like the headline says 2,000 years, and then they say 1,600 years. The journal article has been published in German. We haven't been able to access that yet, so I can't say for sure why the discrepancy. It could just be rounding up, and then it's clickbait to say 2,000 years.
I submitted a request for the paper, but sadly I don't have the copy yet at the time of this recording. But my money is on headline writers being clickbaity. At least Roger can do math.
Yeah, and even if it's 2nd century, that only puts it 1800-ish years anyway.
Right.
So, yeah.
If I can say one more thing, is there any importance with this? I mean, is there any benefit? Well, one of the things we hear all the time from skeptics, and a lot of college kids are being taught this. Rob, you said you just interact with a bunch of people who are saying things like, you know, Jesus was never considered never considered to be God or divine until the Council of Nicaea, which is that's Da Vinci Code nonsense.
I don't recommend that you read or watch the Da Vinci Code for history lessons, but you can check out a recent video on my channel about whether Jesus was considered God.
And we also have a book here we also want to let you guys know about, called How Do We Know the Bible is True?
Because every news story ends with plugging a book, but I just plugged a video, so I guess I shouldn't throw stones.
Kind of a fun one. Matching dinosaur prints found on opposite sides of the Atlantic Ocean. So this is talking about a trackway of more than 260 footprints that were discovered. Half of them were in Brazil, and then 3,700 miles away in Cameroon over in Africa, the other half of the trackway was found. And the researchers say they're almost identical. They're similar in all different levels of composition, in the layer that they're in, all of that. So kind of a neat find. And so then the article goes on to talk about how in the evolutionary worldview, how the continents slowly broke apart, and that's how we have this trackway separated by now 3,700 miles and the entire South Atlantic Ocean. But in a biblical worldview, we have a little bit of a different understanding of this.
The Answers in Genesis model also has the continents breaking apart and moving. So other than the slowly part, I'm not sure what their problem is going to be.
Biblically speaking, we would expect that those fossils and rock layers were not laid down slowly over millions of years, but rapidly in the global flood. So what the fossil record is a record of flood burial. So do these tracks really mesh with that?
No, not really. You were just telling us before the show that you went to a lake recently and walked by the lake and left footprints behind, like by the lake shore.
Yes,
right?
I'm expecting that millions of years from now, people will find my footprints fossilized on opposite sides of the new continent.
It'll be incredible, yes. No, footprints
Not quite how fossilization works.
Yeah, no.
Correct. It is not, and the paper doesn't state or infer this. What are you talking about?
Footprints don't typically fossilize. To fossilize a footprint, you need very unique, rapid conditions. You need kind of a mud sediment full of minerals. You make the impressions like a footprint. Then you got to actually bury that impression quickly to protect it from erosion, from water, or from wind, or something like that, and give it a chance to fossilize and turn to stone, if you will. And so it's usually a rapid laying down of one layer of mud, and then another one right on top of that to protect it from erosion and other factors. It's a rapid process. And so the fact that we find footprints at all screams a rapid formation for these rock layers, not a slow, gradual one, as the secularists would suggest.
Among the lies of creationist ministries are the wholesale misrepresentations of what secular scientists, or just scientists for short, claim. All scientists affirm that rapid burial is usually a factor in fossil formation. But guess what? Rapid burial can have any number of causes that aren't global floods. It is the permineralization and hardening after the rapid burial that can take a long time. This isn't a gotcha. It's a straw man.
Most of the footprints they're talking about here, I believe, are the theropod dinosaurs, T-Rex class, those sorts of things. And the fact that we find them on different continents is an amazing confirmation of the biblical worldview. A lot of Christians don't realize the Bible seems to imply one original supercontinent from the beginning. Genesis 1:9, let the water be gathered to one place. If the water is in one place, well, the land is in one major place, one major supercontinent. What happened to that supercontinent? The answer is the flood.
Yep.
The fountains of the great deep burst forth, causing continental sprint as opposed to continental drift.
Continental sprint versus continental drift. The theory of plate tectonics shows that continental drift occurs at a rate of about 1 to 10 centimeters per year, comparable to the rate of fingernail growth, a process observed and measured in real time. The idea of a rapid continental sprint contradicts the physical laws governing the movement of tectonic plates. Such rapid movement would release enormous energy, causing catastrophic geological effects far beyond anything observed in the rock record, including the complete obliteration of fossil and geological formations, not to mention melting these footprints beyond recognition.
And there's tons of evidence for the global flood as well.
Yeah.
Geologically speaking, just the fact that we do see these geological continuities all over the world, planation surfaces.
The scientific model of slow geological processes is supported by extensive evidence, including radiometric dating, stratigraphy, and the fossil record. There is no credible evidence of a single global flood in Earth's history. The geologic column, with its ordered layers of fossils and sediment, is best explained by long-term processes over billions of years, not a rapid one-time event.
Marine fossils buried in these rock layers laid down by water all over the earth, even on top of mountains.
Marine fossils on mountains can be explained by plate tectonics, where ancient seabeds are uplifted over millions of years due to the collision of tectonic plates. This process explains why marine fossils are found on mountain ranges like the Himalayas without needing to invoke a global flood. Additionally, the stratigraphy of sedimentary rocks around the world shows clear evidence of gradual deposition over long periods, rather than a single catastrophic event.
And we do have a book called Flood of Evidence.
Of course you have a book.
Why do we wear clothes? Genesis. Why did Jesus die on a cross? Genesis. It's a very important book.
Where you can, it's basically like our 5th answers books, where you can get all kinds of answers to questions about the flood, as well as the ark that God instructed Noah to build.
Reading those answers books, as a man who believed everything that this panel is saying, is what first convinced me while Christianity might be true, young Earth creationism was definitely false. The answers are so unconvincing that they deconverted someone who agreed with them.
About an interview that Jordan Peterson and Elon Musk did together, in which Elon Musk was talking about his views on Christianity and religion and things like that. And in this interview, he made some pretty interesting comments. He says he's not a particularly religious person, but he thinks that Jesus' teachings are good and wise. and that there's tremendous wisdom in some of the things Jesus said, like turning the other cheek, things like that. And that he said, I'd probably say I'm a cultural Christian. So Patricia, what does it mean for someone to be a cultural Christian?
In Elon's case, being a cultural Christian means denying, misgendering, and turning your back on your own child simply because they are transgender. You're really nailing that loving Christianity, Elon. Good job.
Well, you're not a Christian, for starters, so Jesus didn't give you options like, well, you can be half saved by intellectually assenting to some of the things I believe. No. You can't just pick and choose what parts of the gospel you want to follow, because that's not the gospel. You're making yourself the authority for truth.
That is literally what every Christian I've ever encountered does. They pick and choose what parts of the Bible to listen to and what parts to ignore. It's called cafeteria Christian, and those, like the panel, who profess to hold to every jot and tittle, are actually picking and choosing the interpretations and harmonizations and rationalizations they need to stomach each and every word of it and align it with their perception of God and reality. If this were not true, we wouldn't have thousands of Christian denominations. We wouldn't have every young earth creationist ministry disagreeing with the other young earth creationist ministries, let alone those heathen old earth Christians.
So I guess it just means that, you assent to some things, but you're not actually a Christian. You're not saved. You have to be in Christ for that.
Elon is advocating for the utility of some of the lessons and organizational structures that he sees in Christianity. Of course, none of that is unique and special to Christianity. And he doesn't think we need saving. And you need to first demonstrate that there's something to be saved from for this to be a concern.
Yeah, and this all stems from an existential crisis that Musk admits to having back when he was like 11 or 12. And during this time, he started to read all of the different scriptures of the different religions in the world. So he hit the Bible, the Vedas, the Quran, the Torah, lots of different things. But he said the thing that he got the most benefit from was actually Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy.
Excellent choice. Among my very favorites. I need to reread those as an atheist. I read and loved them as a Christian, even though I could see that I was the butt of some of the jokes. Author Douglas Adams is also the creator of the puddle analogy that helps people to see the flawed thinking of fine-tuning arguments for God.
And it's rather like a puddle waking up one morning. I know they don't normally do this, but allow me, I'm a science fiction writer. A puddle wakes up one morning and thinks, this is a very interesting world I find myself in. It fits me very neatly. In fact, it fits me so neatly, really precise, isn't it? It must have been made to have me in it.
Which I think is kind of funny. And if you know anything about that story or the movie, there's a supercomputer and they ask it, what is the meaning of life? And eventually it spits back the answer.
The answer to the ultimate question of life, the universe, and everything is 42.
So in this, 42, newsflash, is not the answer to life, the universe, and everything else. But unfortunately, he's really missing the point with all of this.
You're missing the point. In saying that the answer is something as absurd as 42, Adams was attempting to say that it is the question, what is the meaning of life, the universe, and everything, that is itself an absurd question.
Only when you know the question will you know what the answer means.
Give us the ultimate question then.
I can't.
There's obviously no ascribed definitive meaning assigned to us externally. Meaning is what we make.
The thing that's going to take a computer far more powerful than Earth is to understand what question to ask.
Yeah, right.
That's simply the wrong question.
One of the things that you see constantly portrayed in redemptive hero myths across the world is that the adventure is the thing and that the search is the thing, rather than there being a final answer, as absurd as 42 might be, right? The conclusive answer is something like deep engagement in the process.
He talks about how his beliefs can best be described as the religion of curiosity, or he says the religion of greater enlightenment.
Right, and you already described the destination. It's
the destination is
deep understanding.
Yes, to deepen our understanding of the nature of the universe. I guess could call it a religion. I wouldn't be I've said about that, but that is my religion for, lack of a better way to describe it is really, it's the religion of curiosity, the religion of greater enlightenment, and then if you follow that, so like that's the goal, then what falls out of that goal?
So he's just kind of looking for truth in all these different places and picking and choosing what he likes about certain things, which, like Patricia was saying, that makes himself his own God, where he gets to decide what is true and what is not based on how he feels about a certain statement.
Normally, I would push back that being convinced or unconvinced of propositions is entirely outside of our own control, and that coming to such conclusions as a straight biological function in no way makes a person a god in any meaningful sense. But in the case of Elon Musk, I don't think it's hyperbolic to think he has a bit of a god complex and a savior complex.
Now, what's interesting about cultural Christianity is that cultural Christianity can be really beneficial to mankind as a whole, right? Because if we live according to, more or less, according to the principles in God's word, we're living closer to how God designed us to be. That's going to lead to human flourishing, generally speaking, right?
Disagree. I'm going to stick with what I said before. Reducing harm and enabling flourishing at both the individual and collective human level is beneficial to mankind.
There have been principles that lead to the most amount of happiness over time, not just the present.
That iteration element's important.
Yeah, because you have to consider the happiness of future humans as well.
Good point, Elon. I should probably add over longer timescales, but of course one can't accurately predict the intended and unintended consequences of actions. That's a baby Thanos problem best saved for another day. The point is that individual elements of Christianity that line up with my criteria are potentially beneficial, and elements that don't line up are harmful. It's the criteria that determine the value, not whether or not an idea is associated with Christianity.
Much better than when we ignore God's design and we run off in our own direction and do whatever we want. That's obviously going to lead to more human suffering and pain like we're seeing happening.
What I see happening is less suffering and pain as society rejects Christianity. Perhaps we each have a confirmation bias here.
But cultural Christianity, even though it's good for society as a whole.
Disagree.
Look back to what C.S. Lewis said, saying, there's only three options really when it comes to looking at Jesus. He's either liar, lunatic, or Lord.
Ah, yes. The false trilemma. As corrected by friend of the channel, Dr. Bart Ehrman, there's at least one more option. Liar, lunatic, Lord, or legend. The panel here needs to allow for the possibility that Jesus didn't actually say the things attributed to him in the Gospels.
Jesus claimed to be God.
Did he, though? I don't see compelling reason to think he did.
That statement is either true or false. If it's false, then he's a liar, which wouldn't really make him a good moral teacher because he's deceiving people. Or the other option is that it's false and he's just a crazy person because he himself didn't know it was false. So again, that wouldn't make him someone worthy to follow.
This one is possible.
But the only other alternative then is that that statement is true and Jesus is in fact God and worthy of our submission and following.
No, the other alternative is Jesus didn't say those things and that legends developed about him in the decades after his death, and these legends were eventually written down.
Well, that is a great place to end on, so we'll just highlight a couple resources you may find helpful.
Is it books? It's books. Thanks so much for watching. And for more of a former Christian taking a look at the claims of Christians, tap the thumbnail on screen now, and I'll see you over there. Until next time, later.